How's it going, everyone? My name is Falling Hurts, and today we're talking about The Witcher Remake. I'm actually just kidding, but we are going to be talking about the Thaumaturge, an isometric story-driven RPG from the same developers who are making that game, Fool's Theory. Now, this is coming from 11-Bit, the publisher that most recently on this channel we looked at The Invincible, a game that I really liked a lot in its presentation, however narratively did let me down in a couple of ways. That being said, from seeing this game and others from 11-Bit, I knew that their games and the games they put out kind of hit that middle of the road in both budget and presentation in some regards. I knew going in this wasn't going to be a $70 photorealistic looking game, but it also was going to have strong gameplay loop elements with a higher production quality than anything of the lower tier costing games. And with that being said, striking at the $34.99 US dollar mark, the Thaumaturge is an exceptionally high quality product. And as I said, I'm a stinky little YouTuber. I only got the game just over this last weekend, so I'm actually recording this review while other reviews are going out. But I have to say, I've really enjoyed my time with this game. Unfortunately, I didn't play a lot of the side content. I tried to really get through that main story. So with that being said, I'm not going to specifically talk about pacing too much from a narrative perspective. And all the footage you're seeing is from PC, though you can play on Xbox and PlayStation. And you're only seeing stuff from the prologue and the first act of the game. So what is the Thaumaturge? Well, who is the Thaumaturge? That is you, Viktor Shulsky. I can't say it without the accent because that's the only way I've ever heard it. And it's with a W, and he'll make sure you know that. He's kind of like Bond, James Bond, that's kind of his thing. But when we first meet up with him, he is weakened in a couple of ways. As a Thaumaturge, he has special gifts, riding a fine line between this world and seemingly the next. You can interact with Salutors, which are basically folklore demons of a bunch of different natures, and each of those have their individual traits, both visually as well as thematically. But outside of just dealing and harnessing these creatures to help you in combat or anything like that, you can also utilize your abilities to both see the environment and observe in unique and interesting ways, to a supernatural level, of course, but also, much like The Witcher with certain signs, you can kind of manipulate people within the dialogue of the game as well. But as we begin our journey in the prologue in a location that isn't the main map of Warsaw for the rest of the game, we are weakened. Our main Salutor Upir that we've always had isn't at its strongest. The connection is fading. You briefly see him, mind you, no one else can see him, and your abilities of a Thaumaturge are limited. However, after some miracles as well as meeting new companions, you're able to regain your strength as a Thaumaturge and even reach your full potential. And upon beginning this journey, you realize that there is a Salutor haunting this town. And the way Salutors work is they find a flaw or a trait in a certain character and they manipulate that. And in doing so, this whole town is at everyone's throats all the time. In one conversation, I had to calm down neighbors after they were basically mob style killing each other's waterfowl. And as you deal with more and more Salutors throughout the rest of the game, while the flaws of characters, going from greed to gossip to jealousy, can all change, the Salutor's impact on the people around the area that's inhabiting is always very strong and noticeable, and it really adds into those themes of the stories at hand. Genuinely, that is my favorite aspect of the gameplay loop and narrative delivery for the Thaumaturge. You find out that there's a Salutor within the area, and you must deduce who has the flaw and how to draw it out of them, and then, of course, by that point, it's like Pokemon. You've got to capture the damn thing. And that's where I think it's a good place to kind of highlight the actual gameplay loop of the game. So first off, you're going to begin investigating, finding key items around the environment, and you'll do so by using your senses, which I can't lie is so much like The Witcher 3's Witcher Sense that it's unreal. Following more of a red theme, it can kind of lead you to the next objective, which is really helpful in those scenarios as well, without having to check the map all the time. But ideally, it's going to make the items that you're looking for glow. And it's super easy to get the hold of, and ultimately, the only thing I really truly love about it is the red theme that kind of is present throughout everything. The key art for the game, and anytime you're going into an otherworldly view, that red style and that undertone is so strong because it plays into all emotions. Red can mean good, it can mean heart, happy, compassion at times, but it can also mean evil, hatred, blood. This is all imagery that is compounded within the game, and it's always delivered in a really strong sense. But as you find these clues, you're going to be able to make observations and realize that there are traces. Traces basically indicates which character it is that this clue is about, which you may not always know right off the bat, but you'll be able to link them together. And as you're making these early observations with these objects around the environment, you're going to realize that you have 4 different traits within your character. This isn't an RPG where you're going to be able to buff out your strength or your stamina or anything like that. It's not that style. However, you do have 4 traits to look at. You've got heart, word, deed, and mind. And each of these all have their own paths that you can unlock and, put points into as you choose. And the main way that you get experience is either from combat or finding lore or experience pieces around the world. But the first way that you actually notice any of these upgrades coming in handy in any meaningful way are from your observations themselves. As you observe certain objects, you'll get a baseline idea of what each of them are. However, to fully understand the past and history of this object that you're viewing, you need to have the right skill. For instance, if something has heart 1, you may find out a little more about it. Heart relies on passion and some of the greater emotions. You'll get an idea of what the person was feeling when they were holding this object last. Now, when it comes to mind, this can be more deliberate. You may be thinking more specifically what this character was thinking, some of their greater level thoughts. Deed more so feeds into the actual actions themselves, what the object may have been used for, or something that may have happened around it. And then word, in my opinion, is a little more hit or miss. It can be extravagant at times and other times not so much. However, one thing I will say, from a narrative presentation, while you are reading all of this on the screen, the game uses really vivid imagery and descriptions with these, and it really adds so much to the atmosphere while only being text, something that I feel games have a really hard time doing. And especially a lot of the reveals and a lot of the reading into it that you can do while having these upgrades is really, really cool. So it's nice that while sometimes it may need 2 separate upgrades to get the full story, you may get half of the picture and it still seems like, oh, that could be like a crazy reveal. And it's points like this, the investigations, that it feels the strongest to play the game. And as you get more information, you're going to be led down the rabbit hole of talking to different people, kind of getting a feel for their personalities. And sometimes, much like the instance I mentioned earlier with the characters with the geese, you may have to use your powers to intervene, if you can. Dialogue choices throughout the game are interesting. There's a couple of factors that play in. First off, Victor's flaw, the reason that he actually has his own Upir with him, is pride. So one of the dialogue options, kind of your karma system throughout the game is how much do you feed into Victor's pride? There are certain points in the story and dialogue choices that you won't be able to do them if you haven't acted prideful enough. Other times, if you've acted too prideful, he won't be able to say the nicer thing or do the better thing. Another instance of these skill checks actually comes from having, say, Heart version 1 or Mind 3 or something like that. Sometimes you can kind of control someone else in a conversation, much like I said with the signs from The Witcher as it were, to manipulate them into calming down or maybe to a slight degree bending them to your will, maybe speaking out of turn or something like that. And overall it just really feels like you're a supernatural presence within this world that is relatively down to earth. Now, speaking on the actual dialogue of the game, there's a few different points that I wanted to hit on. First off, as much as there is a lot of text and reading within the game, there is just as much voice acting and listening, as well as I was genuinely surprised by how many cutscenes and dialogue camera perspectives there were. While I was trying to nail down exactly what the production value of this game was going to be, I was really impressed by how presentation forward these aspects were. Sometimes when you see the isometric viewpoint, it could be really easy to be a text dialogue, and I'm really glad that wasn't the approach they went for here. The voice acting is hit or miss, I can't lie. Victor himself, as well as a lot of the other main characters, genuinely sound pretty good, though there are times when Victor is meant to be tired that it just genuinely comes off like he might not have wanted to be in the recording booth that day. But overall, I would say a really strong performance for a character that we're going to be hearing talk so much. There are some low points, but if anything, what happened to me were there were just some voices that didn't match the bodies they were coming out of. And with that being said, there's actually a lot of character models and a wide range of variety within the game. There are rarely repeating outfits as long as you're moving, throughout different environments. And each person's class, which is a big theme throughout the game at certain points, especially as you get into Warsaw, is represented really, really well. And all of this while being in a wide range of different body types, male, female, larger people, smaller people, and especially as you get into Warsaw, you're going to be dealing with a lot of races and different types of people coming from all over different countries. Oh, and real quick, one thing I did want to throw in, as you enter Warsaw and you return to a place that Victor hasn't been for like 15 years, it is so cool seeing the juxtaposition of a lot of different aspects. The ruling class, the class system in place, different levels of characters, they speak differently, they respect you differently. And on top of that, you are an open thaumaturge, something that, much like The Witcher, actually, conveniently enough, you're downplayed by a lot of people. I feel like there is definitely a strong will of acceptance or not caring from a lot of the citizens, especially the lower class. But when you get to the more superstitious upper class, people who have a lot of skeletons in their closet, they tend to not like you as much. There are even factions within the game that want you dead or want you out of the city and blame you for a lot of the upheaval of the near revolution. And in that way, it really feels like a boiling pot of a city you're in. And this, paired with all of the different environments that you're going to find yourself in throughout the course of the game, really paints the picture of just a wide variety. I don't know how else to say it, but there's nothing you're going to be looking at throughout the course of the game, whether it's the highly detailed environments or the really in-depth characters, that you're not going to think there was a lot of time and effort put into making this feel realistic, feasible, anything like that, anything you want to say. This game strikes the nail of that alternate history really, really well. But I wanted to go ahead and take this opportunity to say that the sound design and the voice acting isn't always a miss. Matter of fact, a lot of the times it's actually a hit. For instance, when you're on the train, there's train sirens or horns, whatever you want to say, in the background while you're talking. I mean, I don't know why, it just feels like something that could have been easily missed. Another instance of this is when you're visiting a tomb earlier on in the first act, you're actually hearing a lot of voice echoing effects within it, which, I mean, yeah, obviously, but again, it just feels like something that could have been easily missed. One aspect of the dialogue that I thought was a bit of a miss was it felt like you were supposed to ask questions and do things in a certain order. Because if you do things in certain dialogue choices or order the way I felt like I would have asked them, sometimes the dialogue to kind of link these different conversations together just doesn't make a lot of sense. And it feels a little jolted together, if you will. But ultimately, it wasn't that bad. It just felt like the transitionary lines didn't really work. But on the inverse of that same coin, one thing I really have to talk about is the humor of this game. There is a lot of humor, especially as you get further into the later acts of the game. I don't know how else to say it, but a lot of times it's just because of, as an American, seeing this Polish story, it just comes off as very bland, but in just the right way. And I'm really curious to see if anyone else kind of picked up on that as well, but that's how I took the reading, as well as some genuinely funny dialogue here and there. I found myself actually laughing or chuckling a few times, and I thought that was really, really cool. But getting back onto the idea of actually finding a Salutor, once you've deduced who actually has the major flaw, you need to pull that out of them. A lot of times this can be done with dialogue, other times you're eventually going to end up in combat, and that's something that you'll have to do when you get to the Salutor as well. And the way combat works in this game is it is turn-based in the sense that you go back and forth with enemies to eventually whittle down health bars, and somebody's got to win, right? First off, I want to say that the difficulty of the game on normal difficulty feels really good. I think it's forgiving enough in the beginning with some simpler combat encounters to the point where you feel like you have a chance to learn the game, but as you get higher level with more Salutors at your disposal, it really begins to ramp up in difficulty. And there's little nuances here and there, but ultimately, how it works is you have your abilities as well as your Salutor's abilities. And you have multiple Salutors with you at any fight that you can swap in and out of, and they've each got different attacks. The way attacks work within the game is you have quick attacks, slower attacks, and very slow attacks. And each of these kind of consorts to, hey, you can do it this turn, it'll wait a turn, or you can wait 2 turns to get your attack actually done. Obviously, the longer attacks do more damage, and in that regard, it's pretty simple. If I do a quick attack and an enemy does a slow attack, I may actually get 2 attacks in before he even goes. Now, of course, you're usually dealing with multiple enemies. And one way enemies do actually stand out is sometimes they have traits of their own. For instance, they have different perks, like they gain health at the end of each round, or they take 80% less damage. And a way to break this down is you need to attack them with the proper Salutor that kind of feeds into that flaw. And in that way, I really, really, really love the intricacies that can get into with the combat. And it does genuinely start to feel a little more tricky and strategic as the game goes on. And with all that being said, let's end with a little bit of technical talk. So I played this game on PC. However, with it being on Steam, I was able to kind of play a little bit on the Steam Deck. There are Steam Deck settings, and I believe this game is going to be Steam Deck verified. The one bug I did come across was trying to load up my save from my PC onto my Steam Deck. All of my points in the progression and progress within the story were gone, but I was already in Warsaw itself. So I was basically soft locked from continuing. It's almost like it didn't download any of my actual progress, it just plopped me into the story where I was, and that was it. So I couldn't do it that way, I couldn't reload a previous save, it did the same issues. So if you're going to play on Steam Deck, I think you're going to be fine. It loaded in a little slowly at first when you enter a new area, but it ran well enough at the Steam Deck settings. I think if you start a fresh game or if this bug gets fixed, that's going to be a great way to play. But ultimately, I recommend this game on PC. It's really built with mouse and keyboard in mind, but it works really well on a controller. The game ran really well at max settings. I did try a little bit of DLSS and stuff like that, and honestly, at times it was a little wavy, wasn't my best implementation that I've seen. A little bit of artifacting here and there. But as the game opens up and you get out of certain environments, I think it actually works a lot better as it goes along. And for a relatively bug-free experience, visuals that probably hit really well at that $35 price mark, and sound design that could have been upped a little bit in quality in my opinion, didn't take away from the atmosphere that is really strongly presented, as well as the themes that gnaw at you throughout the course of the game. That said, the Thaumaturge isn't a perfect game, but in the way that it handles both its pricing and its delivery of really good content, I can't deny that for what it is, I think it's definitely worth full price. I think if you're wanting in on a game like this now and you want to be part of the conversation, I think it's absolutely worth hopping in, unless maybe you want to do that Steam Deck thing. If you wanted to wait for a patch for that, that's different. However, I don't think there's a reason to miss out on this game. I think it's got a lot of character and personality within the world, and maybe, just maybe, this is going to be a really good tell as to what The Witcher remake was going to be like. I had always pegged it as a third-person game, much like The Witcher 3, but if this is the style they go for, returning to that isometric viewpoint, with maybe even elements of The Witcher 3 thrown in, like the Witcher sense, and just genuinely updated visuals and choreographed conversations, I can't help but feel but that is a really strong indication, with lesser budget mind you, of what we will be getting with The Witcher remake. And in that way, I think this is a really exciting opportunity to get on the hype train with Fool's Theory. And with that being said, my name is Falling Hearts. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you have enjoyed it, consider subscribing. Goodbye.